And we have this character that is jumping in. This is very well done here. And then they have to roll on the ground, and you have to have this very complex roll go through here. How do you do that in a way that's not going to break your mind, and that you have a nice clean pivot that you can move the character around on during this moment right there? So there's a lot of different ways we can do this. If you have Animbot, you can use temporary pivots. You can do all sorts of different things with Animbot, but a lot of times we don't have Animbot, especially if we're just working on our own personal demo reels or working at certain studios. They might not allow Animbot, which is, I would say, very rare nowadays, but there's still those places that you're just not going to be able to do it. So how can we animate this character rolling in a nice, interesting way from their back and not have them dip through the ground or whatnot? So let's explore this. I have not prepped this in any way, so this is going to be a little bit of just exploration, and it's kind of a process that I will do myself when I'm opening my own scene and I have to do this shot with a character, and they might have to maybe get shot out of a cannon and face plant and then like scrape along the ground on their face before they tumble over, or in this case roll on their shoulders, or maybe they're lying down and they have to like roll onto a shoulder before pressing themselves onto the elbow. Who knows what? There's all sorts of weird things that we need to do. So a part of that is opening up our scenes and kind of exploring what do we need to do? How will we make this work? So I'm just going to use the same rig here just so we have a quick comparison between the shot we just saw. So essentially what we want is this character to be on the ground, rip, dip, like that. Let's not break his head here. And we need to be able to roll him from the shoulders. Now, the problem is that if I use the cog to move him around, boop, he's just going to go right through the floor. And actually, let's add a floor here just so we can make sure, this polygon plane, make sure we can actually see where he is. So if I take the cog here, boop, well, that's not great. That's going to be a huge pain to rotate him on the ground, because even if I just want to adjust his position here, his angle of the spine, I have to move that up and then over, and oh wait, I need to adjust here. Oh, dang, it's off the ground again. That's going to be a pain. So I don't want to have to do that. The other thing that I'm going to have to do is I need to adjust the pivot point on his spine, because he's not just rolling backwards in a straight line. He's rolling from one shoulder over to the next in this direction. So I need to be able to have him roll across that surface in a nice, clean, easy way from one shoulder to the next. That ideally shouldn't make for a lot of work on my end. I don't want to have to re-rig the whole thing. But also in a way that when I polish this, I'm not going to have to fight this shot for a whole day, tracking every single frame, trying to get every arc just right. And oh, I got to make a change. Got to redo that whole section again. I don't want to do that. So let's explore this. What options do we have? Now on this rig, we do have a quick option that could probably get us most of the way there. And that is going to be the gimbal cog control. A lot of rigs have these. Not every rig does, unfortunately. So the gimbal cog, or sometimes it's an offset control, sometimes it's a pivot control, there are different names for it. Essentially, it's a control that will allow you to offset where a pivot point is on a character. So if I turn this on, for example, by default, when I rotate the character, they are rotating from the center of their hips, right here. Ta-da! But I want to rotate him from the upper spine because he's on the ground. So I'll take my gimbal cog, that's called on this rig, move this down, and you'll see that my main cog, the center of gravity control, stays up at the shoulders. I can now take this and roll the character this way. So now I can just put this onto the ground right here, and haha, he's doing, oh, what are they called? There's a specific exercise here. Hip thrusters. These were always fun. This is a great way, if ever you go to the gym, a great way to cramp your legs. Especially when you put like a barbell on top of your hips and then try to do this. Ooh, good way to get cramps. But you can see here, suddenly that's much easier to do than when I was trying it before and I had to rotate him and then like reposition him and all of that painful stuff. So with this control, what I can do is just position the gimbal right here. And in this case, it's not quite in the right spot. I need it to be on the back of the character. But it's kind of a pain to see where exactly is this going to rotate from. If ever you want to see the exact pivot point of an object, select the object, go to Display, Transform Display, and turn on Local Rotation Axes. And let's see if this will actually show up here. Do I have... Oh, wait. Do I have to go in wireframe? Okay, yeah. So that's the local rotation axis right there. You can see that pivot point. So it doesn't show through the object, unfortunately. Now, why is that helpful? I wonder if... Let me... Local rotation, scale pivot. Is that going to show through? Okay, perfect. Selection handle is going to be much easier here because we can see it through the object. That is my pivot point right there. So now I can take this object here and just move this up and line it up to that pivot point right through here. And I'm actually going to turn on the local rotation because we can actually see it right there. Boop. That is on the back of the character now. I can also adjust it back here so it's maybe more towards the shoulders. And if I need it to be on one shoulder versus the other, I can just move it here, like so. So now I can have the character on the ground. Let's tilt them over onto their shoulder here. And I'm going to set a key right there. As they roll, I'm going to, let's do this over 1 second right here. I'm going to roll them onto their other side. But notice that as I do this, they now stick through the ground because now they need to be rolling on the other shoulder. Well, essentially what I can do here is just animate my gimbal cog, my offset. So on frame 1, they're rotating from this shoulder right here. When I get to frame 25, they should be rotating from the other shoulder here. Now, if I just do this straight on like this, you see we get this motion here. He's rotating and that pivot point is actually sliding across his back right there. It's kind of hard to see with the ground in place here. So let me move this. Boop. And let's just get it way out of the way. So as we look at this here, you can see that pivot point is moving across his back. There we go. Now, does that mean we're done? No, because as he's doing this, he is sliding back. We need that pivot point to also move across the floor because, well, he's not rotating from one spot like this. He's rotating and that pivot point is adjusting as he goes along from one side to the other. So a quick, easy way I can do this without having to do any complex setups is I just need to, let's see, watch where his shoulder would be. So as he pivots here, his shoulder should end up at this point right there. So I'm going to create a locator. A lot of times when you're animating, instead of complex setups, you can just put markers and use those to help you. So he's going to line up right around there. I don't have to be super accurate with this, but as he rolls, chink, right there. So as I now watch this here, he's sliding and he's in the wrong position. Well, I'll just move him. So, boop, right there as he rolls. There we go. Done. No complex setup, no need to be super fancy. I've got that nice roll from one shoulder to the next. Now, on his back here, his back is going to be a little, there's a dip there. So he's going to probably drop down a little bit. So I could drop him down a little bit right there. So now he drops down and then back up onto that shoulder there. But there we go. I've gotten that nice roll. And because I've got this control here, at any point I can just take my rotate X, let's do this globally so I don't mess anything up, and go, okay, I need to raise him up a lot more. So, bring him up there. The whole roll stays in place. There we go. Oh, shoot. He needs to go a little higher in the middle. Well, okay. Just do that. And make sure let's keep it on the same keys. Like so. Before he comes down. And he's going to start to sit up right over here. So now we get this roll right in there. Nice clean arc. All done. And then I just stand him up. The moment that he leaves the ground, I would need to do an FK-IK type switch. So essentially over one frame, I just reset things. So let's say from frame 25 to 26, he's going to get up off the ground. Well, what I would do is just save that. And then I just need to reset my gimbal cog right here. So let's key that as well. Zero that out and ta-da! That's where I want the character to be. Now, the problem is you see that the character shoots forward when I do that. How do I stop that from happening? Well, essentially, I just need to put my cog where my gimbal cog is right now. So if I do that, let's see, what's going to be the easiest way? I wonder if this is going to work. I'm going to select my cog, then my gimbal cog, and we're going to go to match transforms right there. Did that go exactly where I want it to be? I think so. So essentially what I did is I selected my cog, which is right now at the shoulders, and I wanted to reset it back to the hip. So I'm going to select the gimbal cog here because it is at the hip. I'm going to go to modify, match transformations, and I'm just going to match those transforms. So now they've essentially placed each other back into position. I can zero this out right here and boop, the character switches. You can see that's the switch right there. The cog is going from here to here over one frame, and the pose matches exactly. From there, I could just offset a little bit. So keep rolling right there. So he keeps rolling and then he stands up. There we go. So I've just done this whole complex roll, and honestly, the arc is pretty much close to being done already. I've got the pivot point working. All I would need to do is add a little clavicle motion and I'm pretty much done. There we go. And it took what? How long was that? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? At this point, it's just polish. So by using your pivot points correctly and adjusting your pivot points, you can save yourself a ton of work and make your life a whole lot easier than trying to just brute force it. Now, this was a situation where our rig has a gimbal control or an offset control or a pivot control. Same name or same control, different names. What if we don't have that? What if we're trying to adjust the pivot point and there's just no way to do that? There's no way to really offset things. How do we create that? And I should actually point out another thing is how will I deal with the spine? Because I need to bend the character as well. I don't want to just have him straight as a board here. If you're going to do that, I wouldn't use the FK spine in this situation. If I use the FK spine, it's going to offset him from the main control. And now I'm going to have to keep readjusting things as I animate. That's going to be a pain. So in a situation like this, I would actually use the IK control right here to create the bend just for the frames where he's on the ground. So as he's on the ground here, you can bend the character and animate with the IK spine. This will make it much easier to keep the back on the ground and make small adjustments without having to reanimate everything. And then the moment the character stands back up, you switch back to the FK spine. And now you don't have to worry about the squash and stretch and all of that stuff. I would much rather, let's see, in this shot here, if we're looking at this, it's going to be, I would probably start this motion here, frame 25, rolls across, frame probably, I would say 38, 39. I would probably switch back to the hip motion controlling versus the upper spine. And then I would switch the IK control as well. So I would much rather deal with, what was it, 25 to 38? Yeah, 13 frames of a little bit of IK spine, then have to deal with the FK spine readjusting the pivot point on every single small change I do. That would be a nightmare. I don't want to do that. Anything that's going to keep me from having to counter animate things. So we've got that situation. But going back to the other thing I had mentioned, how do we do this on a rig that doesn't have a offset control? So I'm just going to create a new scene and we're going to use the same rig, but we're going to pretend that this rig does not have a gimbal control. We've just got the cog right here. How do I create that offset control? Well, we just need to create our own control. We need to create our own set of controls that we can use to offset that spine. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this. For me personally, I like to create my own little custom rig. And at its core, we only need two controls with one constraint. So what I'm going to do, and we're just going to do this on the hips. You can do this with locators. If I'm going to do this on a rig and I know what's going to happen later on, I'm actually going to build this into the rig itself as a new set of controls. So I'm going to create a circle right here. We'll take this and I'm going to position it right where the cog is. So take the circle, take the cog, go to modify match transformations, and I shouldn't have hit matched all because now I just scaled it down. So let's make that a little bit bigger. And I'm going to go to modify freeze transformations. This is now zeroed out. Let's take this and we're going to create a new one and we're going to scale this up just a little bit bigger here. Once again, modify freeze transformations. Now, these are going to be my two new controls. These are going to actually control my character for me. It's essentially going to take control of the cog. So this, I'm just going to call this, let's call this, we'll call this master cog, or we'll call it cog master that way. So cog master. This is going to be cog offset. And then this is the cog, the regular cog control. So they're zeroed out, all good. So as I'm working on this now, all I want to do is take my cog offset. I'm going to parent it under the cog master. So if I select this, they all move together like so. And then take my original cog and I'm going to constrain it to the offset control. So select the offset, select the main cog, constrain parent, like so. Now, when I use the main cog master here, it's essentially just like using the cog. It's the exact same thing. But I now have my own offset control, which is going to give me the exact same situation that I had before. I can now offset this. Now I can roll the character on their spine. All good. Done. So if your rig doesn't have an offset in some way, you can create your own like this with just two controls. You have the main master control, which is going to replace the original. It's not really replacing, but it's going to be the thing that you move instead of the original. And then you create an offset control. There you go. So this can be used in all sorts of situations. And can you do it Animbot style? I'm not sure what you mean Animbot style. Oh, do you mean like using Animbot? So doing the same thing, but now we're using Animbot to do it. Okay, we can do that. Now, for some reason, my shelf is not loading up the icons. So let me just load up Animbot here. Okay, so let's figure out how we would do this with Animbot. So with Animbot, I need to rotate the character from the upper spine right there. So the cog is the main control that's going to be affecting this. So what I would want to do is select my cog, and I'm going to use this button here. This is the temp pivot button. And this allows me to just move a pivot point to where I want it to be. So this is going to be right in the shoulder here. And then my character should pivot from that point right there. Whee! So I can just pivot them from here. As they get to the ground, I can adjust my temporary pivot. And let's see, how do you... Let's see. I want to adjust my temporary pivot, which is... I always forget the toggle button. There we go. There we go. Hold down Alt, I believe. Yeah. So you hold down Alt and then you can adjust the pivot. So let me restart that. It's been a while since I've used temp pivot. It's a really nice thing though. And of course, Maya, isn't it wonderful? To be fair, I was kind of doing a whole lot of stuff. No, I don't need to send this. Okay, let's open Maya up again. So once again, let's pretend, let's visualize in our mind what you would do. You'd click the temp pivot button, move it to the shoulder. You'd animate the character rolling. As they get to the spine, you'd move the temp pivot, rotate from the spine, key again, move it to the shoulder. So you could do it that way. But that's pretty much it. You're using the temp pivot button. So yeah, for me personally, I actually prefer not using the temp pivot for a situation like this, mostly because, as you saw, it's kind of a pain to control it once in a while. Whereas by just creating that quick, simple setup, I have a much more ease of control. I can offset these controls so they slide with each other and slide with the roll. I'll be able to adjust the actual curves in the graph editor and just get that really nice and clean. Whereas the temp pivot is wonderful for rotating from different points at different times. But at times, at least for me, I found that it's a little harder to animate it. Not impossible, but it can be tricky. Because it's not actually creating a new pivot point, it's just readjusting where the object is pivoting from, if that makes